Welcome to episode 31 of the Fit Asylum podcast. Today, I am extremely excited to say we have Coach Gators on. Chris, how are you doing, pal?
I am very good. Although, like I was saying before, I prefer that seat to this one.
And do you know what? Most people the other way around, and I think that speaks a lot about you as a person and as a coach, so we'll probably touch on that later, but tell us how you got into fitness.
I've always been a fitness person.
Fitness freak?
So, yeah.
It's probably the word.
Yeah, probably. Always done sports, always the sporty kid at school. As far as like, the teachers would give me the keys to the sports hall at lunchtime to go and play sports and lock myself in with a couple of mates.
Wow, that's pretty crazy. But would they have thought you were quite responsible then?
Yeah.
Because you always come across as responsible, don't you?
Yeah.
I always remember you telling me at your job, you are the problem solver.
Yes.
And that's probably the same at school, and you've probably always been like that.
Yep.
So what made you continue your fitness journey then, and how did it progress? So you played sport at school. How does that translate to then playing or going to the gym?
For me, it was like the story of all of it is always comes back to injuries.
Right.
Always.
Very interested.
So when I was playing sports, I was decent at football, half decent goalkeeper until they realised I was 5'10", and then obviously that's not a career path you can go down.
Nope.
So I started playing other sports and then started going to the gym when I realised I wasn't going to get anywhere with football just because I enjoyed moving, but I'd always been playing badminton, all kinds of different sports, basketball.
Any favourite sport?
Well, that's changed over time. It used to be football and I'll still watch it,
but
it's fighting now.
Is it?
It's
when did that start, the fighting? Because I've
don't always remember. Watched it. Probably for about the last 10 years, I've watched it.
Boxing or MMA?
No, it was MMA.
Nice.
And now it's Muay Thai.
Oh, wow.
Which is a lot more brutal, but absolutely love it.
Why do you love it? The short answer.
Because it's the opposite of what people think. Because it is so brutal, it makes people so calm. Everybody who does violent sports is so calm.
Yeah, because they're under control. And that's what they always say to me. Because I did boxing when I was a kid, and they were always big on drilling in. It's all about discipline. It's nothing to do with the fighting. It's the discipline. And my brother was really good at boxing, but they kicked him out because when he was fighting, the bell went and he would carry on sometimes, and they just had no tolerance for it, and that's it, they're gone then. And he said he regrets that massively, so now he's gone back to doing MMA, and he said they're even stricter, and he loves it, and he's made the mistakes, he's tried to go back now, and he said the same thing about being calm, being collected, kind of a confidence and an aura about himself that he needs, he said. So it's very interesting because I've never done fighting as an adult, so and everyone that we get in that seat, and we've had a lot of PTs who have gone down that route recently, have said it's all about having control of yourself. And that's really interesting. So why does it give you that? What's your inkling?
Well, we've spoken about this outside of this podcast, but everything for me runs deeper. It's always nervous system based. And people who go into fighting sports have usually had some kind of difficulty, trauma in their earlier lives, which raises...
Not some, everyone.
Well, yeah. Have raised their baseline of anxiety.
Yep.
So therefore we need higher stimulus situations to sort of bring us down. So for me, fighting is just problem solving in a very high stress state. And
that's why I brought up that you're a problem solver, because that seems to have been a theme throughout your life and a pathway. And we have Harry on here, who is he's my boss basically, and he does a little side thing where he helps people with stress management. And it's funny because he's into it, judo.
All right.
And he says it's one of the best things he ever does for his stress, playing sport, judo, fitness, and just living a bit of a healthier lifestyle. So for people listening, can you give an example of how the trauma leads on to anxiety, and the anxiety heightens their baseline, and then you use fighting to kind of not alleviate it but problem solve it, if that's the right way of discussing it? Can you give an easy example?
Easy example?
Yeah, maybe give like person A has X amount of trauma as a child, and then how that progresses and manifests through life. Because I've had your coaching, and I know how it works for me, but I'm probably not comfortable talking about that on a podcast. But you could probably, because you deal with this day to day, you could talk about this
So I never like to use hypotheticals, and nor would I want to share anybody else's stories.
Is that because hypotheticals will be someone else's story?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's not fair to do that.
I get that.
So I will only ever use mine.
Okay, interesting.
Which is that I grew up in a house of domestic violence.
Yes.
So my normal becomes being around violence.
Yep.
But as a child, then it's the people you're looking to for safety.
Yep.
Then to sort of guide you, and that becomes your normal then. So you've got a heightened state where you can't do anything about it. There's no safety in those people, and therefore your baseline gets raised. So your uncertainty level is through the roof. That then carries over that throughout your life, you're going to look for situations that feel normal. So that's an example of when people, like, if they're in domestic violence relationships and they leave them, they go straight into another one.
100%. It's the chaos theory, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you grew up in chaos, you're going to create chaos. I have a psychologist, she's literally across the road over there, and her practice, and she talks about that, about if you have chaos, you will try and create that in your own relationship, which is really interesting. And I actually speak to her about business and training, and even with training, I'm the exact same. So at 13, my coach wouldn't let me go up in more than 2.5s. And I'm at a gym now, Cane Training, amazing gym, and they're like, why are you going up in 2.5s every single... And it's just something that's ingrained in you. Yeah. And I guess for anyone listening, it's like either your lactate threshold increasing, because we have a lot of clients who want to increase their lactate threshold. So it's like increasing your threshold of anxiety. Would that be
very
similar?
Close?
Oh, right.
Very close. So the way that anxiety works is you get free-floating lactate in the bloodstream, because that's the energy that we turn into using for energy. So when we talk about glycogen stores, it's mobilized as lactate. So lactate in the bloodstream is not a bad thing.
No.
So
we always say this to people.
As somebody who has trauma, and then you have a prediction then that any sort of violence is then a bad thing, you then have a higher baseline of lactate circulating in the blood. We're going to then feel that as anxiety, because it's a drive to go and deal with the problem. That's all anxiety is.
And then obviously would that cause more stimulant to the adrenal gland?
It does.
Yeah.
But then going back to your earlier question of then how do I use that? Well, then we're giving you a controlled situation in fighting in the gym. So not necessarily fighting as well. So in the S&C area of the gym, I can simulate that and use it as a stimulus for good rather than a negative. So you've got that high drive to do something about it, but then we need to take action, but safely. So if we create action safely, the body then changes its prediction from fighting is a negative to fighting is a positive.
Well, it's the oldest storyline in the world, isn't it? Bad kid, goes to a boxing club, learns discipline, becomes the superhero. And and I think that rings true with a lot of what you do. And I actually said to Nick, who was on the previous podcast, I said, people are not ready potentially for your coaching because people don't like hearing about it. And students ask me, why didn't I continue coaching with you? And I have to be really honest and say to them, I couldn't deal with it at the time. It was too much for me to take on. And why do you think that is? Like, why do people find it difficult to understand your methods, and why is it not so prevalent at the moment?
I think it
because
depends.
They work.
Yeah, they do. They absolutely do. And it goes back to what you were saying there in the start of it, is that people are not ready. They've not willing. They're not desperate. I use the word desperate. People come to me when they are desperate.
Okay.
There are a number of avenues you can go down to get better at training, to get better at fighting, to get fitter, to lose weight. You can go down all of them. And people who have tried all the others probably need me.
Yeah.
And if they've not gone down all the others and exhausted all their options, then usually they don't come to me.
Or they've give up.
It's apathy. When they get to apathy.
So I always likened it to, I didn't understand it fully, so I don't like doing anything I don't understand fully. And I've likened it to that a lot. Do you find that a lot?
Not really.
Oh, right.
Because I won't generally over-explain.
No.
So I've changed that probably. Yeah, I try to make really complex things as simple as possible and do it through experience rather than knowledge. Because I'm a firm believer in anecdotes. I will put anecdotes over every single study you can find me. How does it feel to you? If it feels good, then I don't care what studies you show me.
That's very interesting. So what I've been doing over the last few years is trying to get a lot of different coaching modalities and work out kind of like the nucleus of those. And it's really interesting because I watched a golf lesson recently, and I was having the golf lesson after this student, and I said to the coach, I said, that swing's awful. He went, Deck, he's a 3 handicap. It works for him, so we just try and make that work for him the best we can. And I remember thinking, that's actually what we do in powerlifting. I said, we would find someone and go, well, he's a natural low barrer. Why would we change him to high bar? And vice versa. And I suppose that's the same. You've got something that might work, and it might not be conventional, but it works. It's very interesting, that.
Yeah, and you can take that to an almost literal point. So there's a tool that I use, which nobody seems to talk about, that I got from some of the guys I learned from, which is using a nasal inhale on reps. And people have never heard of this, and it blows my mind that nobody uses it, because like you say, there's 2 different people. So they're going to have completely different mobility and be able to use completely different ranges of strength. So just try this if you listen to the podcast. Try, on the eccentric phase of any movement, try a nasal inhale as you move. When it stops, that is your active range of motion. If you go past that, you're going to compensate the movement. So, for example, when people come to me, oh, my shoulder hurts when I'm benching, take a nasal inhale down, you can almost guarantee they won't be able to touch the chest. And then they should stay where they can go, not go to the chest.
I remember you doing this with me, and it's very fascinating because you feel insanely strong at those ranges of motion, don't you? Talk us through some of your methodologies then, because my brother, Fraser, would say the crazy person's in the gym again. And you didn't mind that. And it was, to other people, it may seem crazy, but then once you partake in it or you see your social media, you explain it very, very well, and it becomes easier to understand. So talk us through some of your methods.
Well, there's only a few real guidelines that I stay within.
Yeah.
Breathing is my main one for safety. So like I say, everything comes back to nervous system.
Yep.
Always I go with breathing. So even if I'm getting people to do conditioning, you are not allowed to breathe through your mouth, because we're training, we're not racing. So we either do nasal only, which is like a C game.
Yep.
And then you've got nose inhales, mouth exhales, which is like a B game.
Yep.
And then mouth only is like flicking the NOS pedal. You've got about 15 seconds.
So this is really interesting, because I had a coach when I was younger, and some of his methodologies now, he actually got in trouble for his methodologies. He would get us to use KT tape over our mouth to nasal breathe. He probably didn't understand why, but he knew it worked.
If it works.
And he got in trouble for that. And now it's funny, because at night, I try hostage tape sometimes on my mouth. Through studies I've read, I always kind of like to learn myself and do it myself. So, and I use nasal strips every single day. I accidentally went on a call with a student the other day with a nasal strip still on when I work at home, and she thought I was an absolute lunatic. And even stuff like I wear toe separators right now, students think that that's mad, but I just love researching and finding new ways. And so a lot of it is old research that just hasn't been credited well enough. And you touched on your references and people who taught you. Will you give them a shout out? Who could people go and start reading a little bit about?
2 people are the main influences. One of them's called StrongFit. It's a guy called Julien Pineau. He's French, don't know where he lives now, probably Brazil. But I learnt from him in Amsterdam. He has come up with some incredible ideas. Like everything that I put in terms of how the body is structured is from him. And I'll explain a bit about that and try not to butcher it. And then the other one, so he's more of the how the body works and using the nervous system in the way that it's supposed to be used.
Just on that, are we talking mainly sympathetic and parasympathetic?
We are, and he goes so much deeper into that. Because there's muscle structures in the body that work together. So a muscle only has 2 jobs. This is a lot of what he uses as his basis. So a muscle either creates tension towards the body and is more useful for stabilizing. So if you imagine like creating tension towards your belly button, okay, muscles will either create tension towards it or away from it. Okay, the muscles that create tension away are usually used for concentric actions. The muscles that create tension towards prefer eccentrics and isometrics.
And which are the 2 stronger contractions?
Well, it depends what you're doing.
Really? Because we're always taught in textbook eccentric is stronger, aren't we?
Commonly.
Yeah,
but if you use the wrong type of muscle for the wrong contraction, it won't be.
Yeah,
so
I suppose so.
I'll give you a specific example of that because that's very theory based. For example, if you're doing a cable crossover, you push in towards the body, lower pec.
Nice.
Okay.
Right, so it's different muscle group as it's contracting. Right, yeah, I get that.
But if you want to punch or push somebody away aggressively, the heel of the hand comes out and you push through the upper pec.
Right.
So the muscle groups all have one of each.
Specific movement.
And they have a preference.
A role to play.
Yes.
That's very interesting. And obviously we teach a lot about sympathetic and parasympathetic, and students struggle to understand the nervous system quite a lot. And when they ask why, I say as a whole it's struggled to understand. As a whole topic it is struggled, or people struggle with it, and there's not as much research done in it because it's not as glamorous, and there's a lot more unknowns about exact ways. You talked to me about fascia as well, which is very interesting and probably leads on to the trauma chat. But there's a few other things. Some of the methodologies you used, like you would put a towel over the assault bike. Do you still do that?
Yes.
Why?
Yes. Because then we're back to nervous system again.
Yep.
If I use a screen to tell me how fast I'm going, I'm looking at a screen for a number, which is outside world feedback to me. So that tells me how well I'm doing.
Yep.
Which takes me towards sympathetic.
Right.
Because it's outside world focused.
So it has to be internal world focused.
So intrinsic. If I want internal world driven, I need no feedback from the outside world, which is I want nasal breathing because that is focus on the inside world. If anything, I would like to cover, at worst I want to cover the screen. At best I want to cover my eyes.
Right.
So a sleep mask on an assault bike with headphones is even better because you're getting absolutely no feedback from the outside world.
Wow, it kind of makes sense to something I read recently where they were talking about the reason highly autistic people wear headphones, or they're stimulated by specific songs. Like there's a Fleetwood Mac song that they are really stimulated
because
by.
of the sound frequency.
Yeah, and that makes sense, doesn't it? Because it's that would then become potentially internal, and which is really interesting. That's
another reason why I like being in a fighting gym.
Yeah.
I would say 90+% of people in a fighting gym either have ADHD or are 100%. On the autistic spectrum.
Well, I think if you think of coaches, the 3 PTs we've had on today have all on some sort of spectrum, whether it be ADHD, autism, mild forms of it. And Nick just been diagnosed with it. Yeah. So it is crazy how it's so prevalent within the industry, but no one wants to talk about it. So why is the world not ready for your methodologies, or not just your methodologies, but the methods you use?
I think not necessarily the world isn't ready. I think Western countries aren't ready because you have to let go of the fact that
Brazil earlier.
that science doesn't always know. Because if you look at scientific studies at the moment, which are very much going towards mindfulness, they're proving things that are thousands of years old 100%. In Eastern traditions. So it's so far behind. And if we are you use COVID as an example, we are looking for science to dictate the way for us. But if it's thousands of years behind, then how much are we leaving on the table? And if we're outsourcing our sort of look for progress to science, then there are many limitations.
Yes, definitely. And I mean, if you looked at science, no one would be deadlifting probably. You know, and that's the crazy fact, because I think if you look at someone like Naudi Aguilar, who I don't agree necessarily with his approach of belittling everything else, but I believe in what he talks about. His actual research is good. If he wasn't such an egotistical maniac, he probably would have a lot more followers in terms of they would respect his opinion more. But I think because he's always trying to tear people down, it leaves a nasty taste.
I think there's a slightly better one than Naudi Aguilar because he talks about the same things, and he's
functional
not
patterns.
He's not as derogatory to everyone else.
Literally everything else.
Everything else, which is David Weck.
Right. Yeah.
Weck method. He's very similar, talks about the same things, but isn't a douche.
Yeah, basically. But I always tell students to go away and do their own research. What if they're usually a beginner student, and they're just started out in their fitness journey and the PT journey, which is absolutely fine. We all start somewhere with the knowledge curve. And I usually start them off with something very simple, someone like a Dr. Stuart McGill, someone like a Dr. Andrew Locke, Sebastian Orr, Matt Ogres. They'll help them with programming in general, very, very basic stuff. If they're intermediate, I'll send them usually to mass research, university papers, or Google journals, just to kind of develop. I always think it's really important that they develop their own views and opinions and do some research of their own. And then if they're really, really advanced, I usually refer them to yourself. So how do you see, because I use you on a slide and talk about how far back the UK is, how far behind the UK is with other countries, and you touched on that there briefly. How far behind do you think the UK is?
I would only say in terms of, like, my world is performance around fighting, and we're probably only really behind America on that.
Fitness as a whole then?
In general.
And health. Mental health.
Oh,
that's what I mean.
Mental health, we're not behind anyone, because mental health...
No one's that far ahead.
No one's as bad as us.
Yeah.
So America and us, because of the way our sort of industries are structured, that's why we have mental health issues.
And that's why I think we're behind.
Yeah.
Because I think if you, like, when I went to Germany and Iceland and Croatia, I was surprised that a GP were in every GP practice, or what they class as a GP practice, was a physio, a psychologist, and a physio, and a PT. Yeah. Which I think is crazy. And I also think, like, stuff like, we're one of the only countries not to use body composition. We still use BMI, which was invented just after World War II.
Well, I'm obese. So.
Yeah, we're all obese, and it's just crazy, which is madness, isn't it? And that's what makes me think. And the fact that only 14% of the UK have a gym membership and only 9% use it probably leads on to what, you know, where we're talking about people just don't want to accept there's an issue. They don't want to go and do something about it. They'll try lots of other methodologies. We have someone in this restaurant we're sat in, and I said to him, it's called John. I said, oh, you're going to start the gym. He said, no, I'm just going to go and, go to Turkey and get fitted with something. One of my sons has had it done. I'd rather spend the 20 grand doing that. Yep. And I just think, that's madness. It's crazy that there's a clear issue there. Like you said, there'll be something causing the issue, which I've learned a lot about over the last 2 or 3 years. There's always a cause. You don't just have an issue. It just doesn't just happen. And I remember thinking, it's just madness to me. It's crazy. And what's your typical clientele? What do you have one?
That kind of ties in. I do have a typical clientele, but there's a couple. Yeah. So I kind of have a structure. The people that I will help are for 2 reasons. My first job is stop you being in pain. Yep. Number 1, I will get rid of movement pain.
I was glad you specified movement pain.
I have never come across somebody who I've had to say no to.
Right.
So that's people coming to me saying, my surgeon says I need my spine fusing, those types of things. No, we can sort that pain through movement. Yep. That's my first port of call. Nice. And then, if you want to go down the other route, it is performance. So, job number 1, stop people being in pain. Job number 2, increase performance. But underneath that, there's always 3 pillars, which is, where do we need to find the weakness? Which is it a physical weakness? Is it a mental weakness that we need to work on? Or is it an emotional weakness that we need to work on?
And do you think you'll be involved, or your practices will be involved in sports teams going forward?
I think they already will be.
I think they already are to a degree.
Yeah, without people knowing what they're doing, they're already doing it to a certain extent.
100%.
And they're doing the what without knowing the why.
And that's exactly it. So my psychologist will say, this is the action you're taking, Dec, because of this. So she said, we need to work out how we solve that before we work out what's happening in the everyday life. Yeah. And it's really interesting. And I think that's taught me a lot about psychology. And I think the good thing is I've used the same psychologist since she was my sports psychologist first, and that's how I got introduced to her. And now she does general public. So it's very interesting to see how that changes and how that mindset can differ, because I was probably so far behind with it and really secluded to it. Didn't even think about that as part of my performance, when I realised actually I was very lucky to have many people who did realise that around me, such as at my school we got a sports psychologist and to speak to her, and that really helped me in my performance. And even now, and like I said earlier, it's not just about sports performance, it's literally how you focus for your job, it's the business, if you're running a business, it's all the lessons, your relationships, everything about it is just all intertwined, and it's so important to kind of, and you can never solve it, it's always an ongoing thing, isn't it? And something I remember she saying to me, she's saying, there's no fix, there's no absolute, that's it, you kind of healed. You're always working on it. That's you as a person, and you've got to develop that. You can't stop those traumas or things that have happened to you. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and it comes through, and that's where the link is between all 3, the physical, the mental, emotional. Yeah. Because if we've got an emotional trauma, This is the one that blows people's heads off. So if you've got an emotional trauma, there is a link between emotions and the body. So there is a direct correlation between certain muscle groups and specific emotions.
Is that like that foot thing? Where like people, footology, where like they'll be like, this links to certain muscles.
That's more like the acupuncture. Yeah. That goes from all of the nerves which innervate all of the muscles. So that's why the acupuncture works. This is more, very much more woo-woo than that,
right,
if anything. So let's use a specific example to tie all three together.
Yeah.
So we'll go back to my example.
Yep.
No safety in my household growing up
yep.
because of domestic violence. So I can't go to my mum for safety, I can't go to my dad for safety.
Yep.
So in the body, external world safety is in the hamstrings, on the inside hamstrings specifically, okay? The right-hand side of the body is more masculine and more towards the outside world, more sympathetic.
Yep.
The left-hand side of the body is more inside world, more parasympathetic, but more towards the feminine.
Interesting.
Okay, so I've got no safety in either.
Right.
So the muscles, the inside hamstrings, are then down-regulated as a result of the trauma.
Yeah.
So therefore my knee doesn't stabilize too well because the inside hamstring doesn't work as it should. So what happens to me when I play for football? Valgus knee, ACL.
Yeah. 100%.
ACL tear on both knees.
And what's the most common injury in the world? ACL.
So what's the reason when people are asking, you see all these news articles, why are we getting so many ACL tears in women? Well, do you want me to tell you it's because of parenting?
Yeah, they're probably not.
They're not ready for it.
Yeah, all the world seeing it as a male sport with females being played.
And then we've got the physical aspect of it right there. We've got the emotional aspect, but then the mental aspect is then the anxiety that comes from the raised baseline we were talking about earlier. So we've got a problem in all three. And then to solve it or to improve it, then I'm working. So if I was working with me, I would be looking to get connection back within that muscle to get that mind-muscle feedback.
And that's how you'd fix it.
It's how I'd improve it.
Fix it.
Because people aren't aware of the traumas. Our nervous systems are great at shutting them down and hiding them away from us until we're ready, like we were saying before.
Nice.
So my job then is to tell people, we're going to fix that by attacking this muscle and getting it to work properly and having it function correctly. But with the increased safety and connection to the muscle, we get increased access to our original trauma.
Do you know what? Like my chiro said the exact same thing to me recently, and he uses the grip test to kind of tell me how I'm going on with it. And he's like, well, if we've tried this isn't working. We've tried this isn't working. So it's your nervous system that we need to do this. And he's given me some nerve stimulant stuff, which is crazy. But Chris, thank you so much for joining us. This is all we've got time for, but where can people find you if they need to ask you questions, and we'll get you on? I've already asked, I don't know if I've asked Chris actually, but I've already said to Harry, my boss, I want you to come and do some CPD for us. So that'll be in the pipeline, guys. But where can people find you on socials?
Just Instagram usually, at Coach Gators. Simple as that.
Thank you very much, Chris. Really appreciate that, man. And very insightful podcast. Thank you very much for listening, guys, as well.